I hate this house, I thought to myself as I crept over to the closet door. It was hard to be silent with my steps, as this house had old wood floors that creaked with any amount of pressure. I gently wrapped my fingers around the old brass doorknob, quickly turned it, and flung open the heavy door. There was nothing there, aside from some miscellaneous items that I had placed there for storage, items I didn't intend on using anytime soon. Some old comic books, childhood toys, that sort of thing. I don't know what I was expecting to see, but there was nothing else there, contrary to the sounds I had heard just a moment prior. A loud crash, some light thumps, followed by sporadic muffled banging and scratching on the closet door, had awakened me with a jolt. It was too loud to be a mouse. Maybe a raccoon had gotten in somehow and found its way out just before I almost ripped the door off its hinges. I closed the door, shook off the eerie feeling, and went back to bed. This was the night it all began. The next morning, I opened the closet to investigate further. I peered inside, and with it being a bit brighter, I could see that there were no breaks in the wall nor in the ceiling that would permit anything to enter this tiny space. Nothing large enough to make those noises anyway. It couldn't have been a raccoon. Maybe I was dreaming. You know, like when a dream seems real, like being sprung to life with a jerking motion after the feeling of falling. That had to be it. I mean, what other explanation could there be? The house was old. It made noises, some due to showing its age, others, well, not so much. Doors unlocking and opening only to slam shut, followed by stomping footsteps running up the 2 flights of stairs into the attic. No matter how many curtains were open nor how many lights we had turned on, the house was dark. Not pitch black, but rather a dark hue. My bedroom was my safe haven from these things. Although it was dark and uninviting itself, nothing happened in my room these 6 months we had lived there, so far. So that's where I spent most of my time, drawing, practicing guitar, or talking on the phone with friends. Yeah, that's how we communicated back then. I left the events of the night before well enough alone. Like I said, it had to be a realistic dream. These things happen, I suppose. The rest of the day went as a normal day should, chatting with my family, making jokes, and I even went outside for a bit to play basketball with some friends. I wasn't very good at it. I wasn't very athletic when it came to sports, but they pressed me to get out of the house. It was a Saturday and I could pretty much stay out as late as I wanted. But when the streetlights would barely illuminate the basketball court, it was time to call it quits. Everyone was tired and just wanted to settle in their own homes anyway. My friends all lived along the same direction as I did. My stop was the first. We all said our goodbyes and I entered my house. I hated that house. Even the outside was creepy. The front yard was surrounded by an old wrought iron fence and gate. Front yard. You can't call a small patch of dirt a front yard. I only had one friend who would dare come into the house, and he lived on the other side of town. The others wouldn't tell me why they wouldn't come in. They would just tell me, "I'm sure you already know." I did, but I wasn't going to acknowledge it. Not that loud anyway. When I entered the house, everything seemed normal. Dark, but normal. My parents both worked third shift and were getting ready to leave. That meant my sister and I would be home alone all night. Nothing unusual. This was a routine, and my sister and I were good teens. I told my parents to have a good night at work and I would see them in the morning. My sister was already in her room. I went up the old wooden stairs that creaked with every footstep and went into my room, leaving the door slightly cracked to listen for my parents to leave. I heard the front door open, then close. Then I heard my father's old pickup truck start up and drive off. I knocked on the door that adjoined my room to my sister's to let her know I was home. She opened the door, mostly to tell me to leave her alone, when suddenly there was that sound again. We could hear the front door swing open so hard that it hit the wall behind it. Then it slammed shut. Footsteps raced up the stairs just out of my room, stomping the entire way. The attic door across from my sister's room swung open just as fiercely as the front door had. It slammed shut and the footsteps stomped up to the attic. My sister, who was already startled and scared at this point, rushed into my room and begged me to go out to check it out. So I did. I'm not saying I was the best older brother there was, but I wanted to make sure our mom and dad didn't return or something, and if there wasn't an intruder about. I had a phone in my room and we could call for help if there was an intruder. I slowly stepped out of my room, my sister resigning herself to peeking from the slight opening in my door. I crept down the stairs and could see that the front door was closed and locked. I went to the door, opened it, and saw that Dad's truck was still gone, so I made my way up to the attic, where my parents made their bedroom. Maybe Mom wasn't feeling good and decided to come home or something. There was no one there. At this point, this had happened often, to the point where we were all used to it. It became bothersome and pretty scary, but we were used to it. Always checking doors, locks, and stairs. For my sister and I, we were afraid at night alone. Not a paralyzing fear, but enough to make the hairs on our arms stand on end, as if trying to escape our bodies and run away from whatever was going on. But we had to live in that house. I hated that house. I quickly returned to my room where my sister was in the middle of a mini panic attack. She already knew what I was going to say, but she asked anyway. "Was anybody there?" I just shook my head nonchalantly. I didn't want to scare her even more than she already was, and I thought if I spoke the words that I would be breathing life into whatever this was. See, I had been plagued by a shadow man since I was about 8 years old. That's the only way I know how to describe him. He had not visited me in a while, since we moved into this house, I think. But this wasn't him. The shadow man never made a sound. Not a footstep, and he didn't interact with physical objects. I ignored him, and he mostly ignored me. Scary, but tolerable somehow. This was different, something way different. I wondered if the shadow man was afraid of that house as much as my sister and I were. I hated that damn house. My sister sat in the room for a little while as I told jokes and talked about other teens at school. She told me about her friends and how she was going to try out for cheerleading. This was a new school to us, and we had risen to the top of social status somehow. Strange for poor kids. But not many kids in this town came from money. I guess we were just new, interesting, or something. Most of these kids grew up together, something my sister and I would never know. When she felt safe enough and the sounds that scared us were long past, my sister returned to her room. A few minutes later, I could see her light flicker off at the bottom of the door connecting our rooms. I put on some music, turned off my own light, and laid at the bottom bunk of my bunk beds. I lay awake for a while, listening, hoping nothing else would happen, so my sister and I could get some rest. As I lay in the dark, with only moonlight peeking in through my blinds, I heard it again. From my closet came a loud crashing sound, then light knocking and scratching at my closet door. I know I wasn't asleep this time. I was fully awake and aware, so I repeated my actions from the night before. I snuck over to the closet, wrapped my fingers slowly around the old brass doorknob, and turned it quickly as I flung open the closet door. Nothing. There was nothing there that I could see. Nothing but a chill. As I closed the door and walked back to my bed, nerves rattled, my sister popped in through the adjoining door. "What was that?" Damn, she had heard it too, and she wasn't asleep like I had hoped. I replied with a quick wit. "Nothing, I just kicked off my shoes." Having both of us unnerved twice in one night was a bad idea. She would likely try to talk me into taking her out of there and refusing to ever spend another night in that damn house. I wasn't opposed to that idea, but the repercussions from our parents would be worse than any weird noises an old house would make. This explanation seemed to relax her. She went back into her room and closed the door, and I watched as her light clicked off once more. The truth set in that I was going to have to deal with this on my own. That made me even more uneasy. Even though this thing wasn't trying to hide its presence from anyone else, I felt alone, isolated. This was my room. It had chosen my safe space and by extension me. It was all I could do to muster the nerve to close my eyes and go to sleep. I looked over at my alarm clock. It was now 10:30 p.m. and I was still exhausted from the basketball game just a couple hours prior. It was warm outside, but I was cold and still shaking from the closet incident. I finally forced my eyes to shut and dozed off. The next morning, I tried to put the whole night out of my mind, but the thoughts persisted, nagging at me, telling me to check my closet again. I tried to force the idea into my head that I had actually fallen asleep and dreamed the whole thing, knowing damn well I was awake. So I gave in to my gut feeling to check the closet again. This house was old and wasn't taken care of very well by the previous tenants. Floorboards had gaps in them. Paint was chipping. The windows were old wooden contraptions that allowed the outside air to invade my space. That sort of thing. My closet door wasn't immune to this disrepair. Wood shone through the fading and chipping white paint on the inside as well as the outside. The house wasn't a dump, but it was obvious that no one had taken care of it for quite some time. I stepped to the closet door, nerves on high alert. Who knows what I would see in there, if anything. I flung the door open to see it once again vacant. It was barely big enough for a person to fit into. Two, if they did some kind of clown car magic trick. I relaxed and began closing the door. As I did, I happened to look down at the floor of the closet. How had I not noticed this before? I kept my room clean. On the floor were tiny chips of white paint. Maybe opening and closing the door so much the past couple of days has jostled some loose paint. I looked at the inside of the door and it was obvious that I had not been dreaming the night prior. Scratch marks. Nothing deep. They didn't penetrate the wood, just the paint. The scratch marks were short, not slashes, as if someone is just using their fingernail to chip away at the already flaking paint. I was relieved when I heard my dad's truck rounding the corner to our street. Like a dog awaiting its master to return, my ears perked up. I quickly closed the closet door and vacated my room. I headed down the stairs as I could hear the doors to the truck close in front of the house. That house. I hated that damn house. Hopefully, with Mom and Dad now employed, we could get the hell out of here. I didn't want anything fancy, just something that didn't scare the crap out of me. I often talk about how brave I was in that house, acting like a big man when confronted with this crap. The truth is, I was afraid. More afraid than I had ever been. Even the Shadow Man was preferable to whatever secrets this house was slowly revealing. I watched as the front door opened and my parents stepped into the house. I knew my mom hated this damn house too. But not as much as I did. No one did. I could tell they were both tired. I didn't want to bother them, but I had to tell them what had happened. My dad hurried up the stairs, headed to their bedroom. I was glad for this. If he heard what I had to say, he would likely brush it off and tell me I was being paranoid. So, cornering my mom alone was the better option. "Mom, the thing with the front door happened again," I told her. Sympathetically, she responded, "Again? That's the third time this week." This confirmed that she knew something, or experienced something. I had only known of 2 other times. "Yeah, I checked the house and no one was here," I answered. "But there's something else," I continued. "My closet." "What about your closet?" she asked. I told her what had happened for 2 nights in a row, and I could tell she wasn't amused, or maybe she was just trying to calm me down. Even though I hated this house, I knew my parents were doing the best they could, and I hated embarrassing them over this. I walked with her up the stairs as she herself wanted to get to bed. I stopped in front of my door and asked her to come into my room. She humored me. I opened my closet door and showed her the paint chips on the floor and scratches inside the door. "Not funny. I had a long night at work and I'm not ready for your pranks." She thought I did this. "But Mom, I didn't," she cut me off. "Look, I'm really tired and just want to go to sleep. We'll talk later. Clean this up and stop scratching the paint on your door." That settled it. I was alone. isolated. If my mother had noticed things going on in the house, she wasn't going to let go of her secrets. I hate this damn house. I grew up in a time when men were supposed to be men, fearless, aggressive, unafraid of anything, in control of our emotions, and we definitely weren't supposed to believe in ghosts, let alone be afraid of them. It was the living that we should keep an eye on. That's what my grandparents had told me. The rest of the day, I refused to go back to my room. I didn't outwardly protest, I just made up excuses not to go in there. But it was Sunday and I had school the next day. I would have to go up there at some point to go to bed. I refused to do so until the last possible minute. My parents were off work that night, and this was a relief. At least I had that. After a full day of staying downstairs and watching TV, I finally made my way to my room around 10 o'clock. I laid in my bed, nervous, afraid, but nothing happened. No crashing, thumping, no scratching from the closet door. Not that I heard anyway. No one barged into the house and ran up the stairs. It was quiet, really quiet. Save for the sound of wind penetrating the gaps in my window frame. I fell asleep and had the best rest I had had the last couple of nights. The next morning I awoke early to get ready for school. Maybe my parents were right. Maybe there was nothing to worry about. I could just be getting myself worked up over nothing. But still, there were scratch marks. I tried to convince myself that they had always been there, and I'd just never noticed them. The following few nights were about the same. Sure, there were sounds coming from this old house, but they could be easily explained. An old furnace, old pipes banging. I resumed using my room on a more regular basis, drawing, practicing guitar, the usual. I still hated this house, but I figured I should at least try to make the best of it. Who would have known how long we would have to be in this creepy place? It was only a few months and already seemed like forever. Maybe it was longer. I can't remember exactly. After my parents had a couple days off, I started feeling a bit more comfortable. There had been no doors slamming, no footsteps on the stairs, and definitely no craziness in my closet. I didn't really understand that these sort of things weren't constant, that sometimes there could be days or even weeks lapsed in strange happenings. I thought maybe this thing had moved on, crossed over to some light that I had heard about, or just went to another house. Either way, that was fine with me. I also didn't understand that the gaps in events were actually another way of breaking down the intended victim. For a couple of days, I dropped my guard. My life was going to become a living hell for it. My parents left for work around 9 p.m. that evening. My sister and I retreated to our respective rooms to settle in for the night. My sister and I had all kinds of freedom, but we seldom exercised it. We still had rules, but they were much looser than other people we had known. We didn't sneak friends over when we were alone in that house, and we didn't go out. Instead, we would just go to our rooms until we were ready to call it a night. This night was no different. After chatting on the phone for a bit, I laid in my bed. I watched as the light from my sister's room broke and only darkness came from beneath the door. The moonlight peeking through my blinds was casting dull streaks of light in my room. I pulled my blankets up to my chest and allowed myself to relax. My eyes had not even began to creep their way shut when suddenly there it was, a crash and a thump coming from my closet, followed shortly after by light knocking and scratching at my closet door. I lay petrified, eyes wide open. I could hear the faint shuffling coming from my closet. In the past, I'd got up to check the closet. Not this time. I was too afraid. The sounds continued for about 5 minutes. Maybe it's just some rodent. Nah, couldn't be. I checked my closet a few days prior and there was no way in or out. I laid there terrified and shivering when all of a sudden, and to my horror, I heard the closet doorknob begin to move, as if someone had placed their hand gently on it and began turning it slowly. I heard the latch click as the door began slowly opening, creaking. My mind raced. I hated this house. I hated my room. Shaking with fear, I laid there unable to move. Whatever this was, I knew there was no way I could defend myself. I couldn't move. Where was my sister? She had heard it the last time and came barging into my room that night. I didn't need her to defend me, but I needed something, anything to startle this thing, something that could even break my own concentration so I could at least get my sister out of her room and run downstairs. But there was nothing. She must have been deep in her own sleep. The closet door continued opening slowly, the hinges making a high-pitched squeak as if they were trying to warn me. My heart was beating in my chest, thumping. I wanted to be brave, but that time had long passed. The door finished its outward swing and my room fell silent. There was no sound at all, not wind breaking the seams of my old wooden windows. Nothing, not even the sound of my heart racing or even my increasingly heavy breath. It seemed like hours that I was laying there in complete silence until the disturbing quiet broke. A sound. A board creaked, then another. And another. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear this thing getting closer to me after it exited the closet at the foot of my bed. This was no rodent. Mixed with the sounds of floorboards giving way, I began hearing another sound. This one was unfamiliar, clicking, as if this thing was using its mouth to make the sound. Judging from the direction the clicking was coming from, this thing was the size of an adult. Slowly clicking as it took one step, then another, rounding the foot of my bed and beginning its slow walk across my room, towards the door to my sister's room. Somehow I found the strength, the courage, and I threw my blankets off my shivering body and jumped up from my bed. I ran to my sister's door and began pounding on it. Behind me, I could hear the footstep rush back to my closet and slam the door behind it. It took a minute, but my sister finally yelled, "What?" I yelled back, "Get over here, now!" I could hear the footsteps shuffling around and saw her light snap to attention beneath the door. Then her door slowly opened. I rushed over to my own light switch next to my door leading to the hallway. It was an old light switch, not typical. I didn't have to flip it up to turn it on. It was 2 buttons stacked one above the other. I pressed the top button and my room was illuminated. My sister was still waiting impatiently in the doorway adjoining our rooms. She looked tired and angry. She was a heavy sleeper and didn't like being disturbed. "Did you hear any of that?" I whispered from across the room as I tried to catch my breath. "You banging on my door? Yeah, I heard it. What's your problem? Leave me alone." She gave me another look. Her eyes were a little more adjusted to the light, a curious look. I must have looked terrified, and I could barely get the words out with short breath and my heart still thumping in my chest. "My closet, banging, the footsteps, any of it?" She looked really annoyed at this point. "What are you even talking about? You must have been dreaming. Go back to bed and leave me alone." I didn't have the nerve to tell her that I may have just saved her life. Well, at least that's how I imagined it. She quickly slammed the door shut and I saw her light abruptly go dark. I made my way back to my bed slowly, the whole time keeping an eye on the closet door. I didn't dare turn off my own light. I laid down and after several minutes of trying to calm my racing heart and catch my breath, I was able to close my eyes. I didn't really sleep though. At least I thought I didn't. You know that feeling that you're still awake, but you're also having short dreams? I dreamed that my closet door had opened again, replaying the events of the night over and over. I must have dozed off completely at some point because when my alarm went off at 6 a.m., I slowly opened my eyes to a dark room, pitch black. Not even the moonlight was present anymore. I know I left my light on. I knew I did. Maybe my parents got home early and noticed it on. That had to be it. I made my way to the light switch and turned my light back on. I reached outside my door and turned on the hall light so I could make my way to the bathroom. I realized I'd been holding everything in my bladder the whole night. As I relieved myself, I watched as my father's truck pulled up in the front of the house and both my parents got out. My thoughts jumped back to my light. How did it turn off? I knew, I just didn't want to admit it. I flushed the toilet, washed my hands, and could see the circles under my eyes in the mirror. I left the bathroom and stopped at my sister's door. I usually had to wake her up for school. Today was no different. I could hear her alarm going off repeatedly. I knocked several times, louder each time. By this time, I could hear my parents downstairs scurrying around. My sister finally opened her door, looking even more annoyed than she had the night before.
"What the hell is wrong with you? You kept me up all night stomping around your room and turning your light on and off,"
she insisted. I replied, "But I didn't. I went to bed right after you went back to your room." Rubbing her eyes, she responded,
"I know what I heard and saw. Stop playing jokes."
I dared not press the issue. She was tired and wasn't going to believe me anyway. She closed her door and I walked slowly back to my room. My mother yelled up the stairs,
"Hey, you guys up?"
I yelled back down to her, "Yeah." I knew I shouldn't tell my parents about any of the night's happenings. It wasn't such a warm reception last time. Then my sister stormed out of her room, stood at the top of the stairs looking over the old wood banister. She yelled down,
"Mom, he kept me up all night. He was stomping around his room and turning his light on and off. Can you please tell him to leave me alone?"
I was mortified. I didn't want to be made to feel crazy again, and my sister just threw me under the bus. She looked at me, gave me a mean grin, and stormed off back to her room, slamming the door behind her. My mom and dad were good parents. They treated us as adults and generally didn't scorn us often. There was no reason to, really, but they had their own stresses and didn't need this to compile on top of them. No, I had to deal with this alone. A bad decision in hindsight. When I got home from school, I sat at the kitchen table finishing whatever work I had not completed at school. My dad liked it when I did my homework in plain sight. He wasn't the most astute student in his younger years and liked to see us make an effort to be better. He and our mother didn't want us to struggle financially the way they were at this time. Although we had no means for my sister and I to go further our education after high school, still, we did what we could. When I finished my homework, we all sat at the dinner table to enjoy some time together before our parents had to get ready for work again. As we sat and talked, each of them took turns talking about their day. My parents spoke first, talking about people my sister and I didn't know and situations we didn't really understand with work. My mom motioned to my sister and asked about her day.
"I don't know. I was falling asleep all day because he,"
gesturing toward me,
"kept me up all night stomping around his room and turning his light on and off."
It seemed like they reacted in unison. "What? Why were you doing that?" my dad responded. Damn, I had to make up something quick. I couldn't just tell them that it wasn't me. Maybe this would be the one time they felt I betrayed their trust and had friends over in the dead of night or something. I opened my mouth to see whatever words would fall out, when suddenly the front door swung open hard, then slammed shut. It slammed so hard that the wall decoration shook and rattled. Then the footsteps stomped down the hall, up the stairs, and down the hallway to the bedrooms on the second floor. My dad jumped up and ran out of the kitchen and up the stairs as fast as he could. My mother, sister, and I sat quietly. Inside, I was a tornado of emotion. My heart thumped against my breastbone, and I could feel the blood leave my face. This was the distraction I needed, but not the one I wanted. My mother tried to stay calm, but I could tell it was a difficult task. Her face and that of my sister's were both pale white. My ears sharp as a tack, I listened as my father ascended the stairs. As he darted upward, we could hear the attic door open, slam shut, and the heavy footsteps continue up to the attic floor. I heard my father's own footsteps charge down the hall. At the end, there was a short pause. Then the attic doors slung open again, and my father's footsteps could be heard going into his room in the attic. There was another moment of silence. He must have stepped carefully because we didn't hear him come down the stairs and back into the kitchen. He didn't look afraid. Dad never looked afraid. Instead, he looked aggravated. It must have been the wind, he let out. This wasn't enough of an excuse to satisfy any of us, especially me. Not with everything that had been happening in my own bedroom, but we dared not say anything. By this time, dinner was over. We were too shaken up to eat anything else. If Dad had seen anything, he would never tell us. He didn't want us to be afraid in that only place we could afford to live. He also saw it as a way of protecting us. We knew this, but we dared not say anything. An hour later, my mom and Dad were again preparing for work. This scared me. I didn't want them to leave us alone in that house again. I hated that damn house. I had begged for them to get day jobs, but this was all they could find at the time. My sister made her way up the stairs to her room. I stayed downstairs. I wasn't going up there until the very last minute, and I did have to go to my room at some point. I couldn't sleep on the couch. I wouldn't be close enough to my sister if anything were to happen. So, after my parents headed out, I walked slowly up the stairs, afraid and alone. I reached the top and opened my bedroom door. I immediately turned on the light. It was my intention to leave it on all night. I stayed up for about 30 minutes until the previous night's exhaustion really hit me. I laid in my bed with the light on, staring down the foot of my bed at the closet door. When I was satisfied that nothing was going to happen, I relaxed a bit. I saw my sister's light go dark under the door separating our rooms. I heard her walk across the floor. Then, silence. I closed my eyes but didn't really sleep. I could see light through my eyelids. Then, click. Darkness. Immediately from my closet door came the sounds again. A loud crash, thumping, shuffling, light knocking, scratching. I snapped my eyelids open and stared at my closet door from the rim of my blankets. Eyes wide, heart pounding, out of control. I began to shake nervously as I heard the doorknob begin to turn. Then, slowly, the door opened with a squeak. A stench blanketed my room. The smell of eggs and decay. My room went cold. So cold I could see hints of my breath pluming from under my blankets and surrounding my eyes. Then, the footsteps. Not like the footsteps running up the stairs earlier. Slower, deliberate. It exited the closet slowly, taking much care to make sure I was at peak fear. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear it round the foot of my bed. Floorboards screaming with every step. Still unable to see, it walked toward my sister's door. It must have heard me let out a heavy breath of air. The footsteps just stopped short of my sister's door, then turned and slowly began walking in my direction. My eyes wide as saucers, trying to absorb whatever small specks of light I could see nothing. Nothing but faint outlines of objects in my room. It stepped closer, then closer, closer still until the footsteps stopped beside my bed. It seemed like it stood there looking over me all night, but it had only been a few seconds in reality. It gave a sort of loud snort, then turned and creeped its way back to the closet. I could see the moonlit closet door close. The smell dissipated and the air warmed again. I laid there paralyzed, shaking, afraid, even sobbing silently to myself. I hated this damn house. I laid there for about an hour until the adrenaline wore off and exhaustion overtook me. I tried to stay awake, but it felt like something was pressing my eyelids to make them close. I tried to force them open, but it was no use for more than a second. Finally, I drifted off to sleep. There, in that cozy room, in the pitch black. The next morning, I expected protest from my sister as I woke her for school, but there was nothing. She must have been heavily asleep from being kept up all night 2 nights prior. Thank God, I thought to myself. I didn't need another outburst from her notifying my parents that I was some kind of night owl who enjoyed keeping her awake. The routine was the same, although I was still shaken up from the night before. At school, I couldn't concentrate on my work. I was too distracted, exhausted mentally and physically. I became distant from those I had associated with in this small town as I tried to weigh my options for the upcoming night and nights to follow. The living room? Nope. Doors slamming, footsteps, headlights from cars constantly barraging the 2 windows in the front of the house. My parents' room? No teenage boy would ever want that to get out. So, no. The basement? Not going to happen. That space had a cracked concrete floor that became mostly dirt. It was darker than the rest of the house, and I had been present when something shoved my mother down there. Not even an option. The only option was to stay put in my room. As desperate as I was, there was nothing else. The rest of the day went the same way as the prior day. I did homework, had dinner with my sister and my parents, remained silent the whole time, and I'm sure my parents noticed the change in me. Probably thought I was on drugs or something. This time there was no slamming of the front door and no footsteps to the attic. We actually got to finish our meal before our parents got ready for work. That's when the dread set in entirely. Maybe I was manifesting this thing with my own fears. My sister made her way to her room. I waited until the last possible minute, again. Then I was forced to slowly walk up the old wood stairs with the large wooden banister, each step creaking under the pressure of my feet, each step feeling like it could snap if I stepped too hard. My heartbeat accelerated with each carefully placed step. Once I reached the top, I turned to my left and faced my bedroom door. I took a deep breath in an effort to calm myself, to no avail. I grabbed the old brass doorknob, turned it slowly, and opened my door. Every door in this damn house squeaked, as if to warn anyone on the other side that there was an intruder. Yes, I felt like an intruder in my own home. I clicked on the light, and no surprise, the room was vacant. I could hear the slight breeze penetrating the edges of my windows. I popped a cassette into my old wooden console stereo. Something safe, not my usual heavy metal. The Beastie Boys. I kept it low in an effort not to disturb my sister in the next room. With my light still on, I laid in my bed. The misadventures and fun-loving songs the Beastie Boys had recorded on License to Ill, soothing me slightly. It helped, but I could still feel the oppression of my room. Oppressed. Yes, that was it. From all angles, and every angle surrounding me in that damn room, I was feeling oppressed. Like the walls were closing in around me. Anxiety, fear. I couldn't control it. As I lay there, I looked down the foot of my bed at the closet door. It was too close to me. I looked over at my sister's room and could see that her light was still on. So I jumped out of bed and began dragging my large wooden bunk beds across the room. It took some effort, but I was able to maneuver it to the other side of the room, against the wall that housed the door to my sister's room. The bed fit snugly against the wall without blocking the door. It put me at a better vantage point to keep an eye on my closet, and it also became a strategic location in case I had to make a break for it into my sister's room. I laid in the bed. I had flipped the cassette to play the B-side of License to Ill by this point. Encased in the light, I still had not switched off. I laid there, noticing that the endeavor had distracted me. I felt tired and could probably even sleep. Then, knocking and scratching from the closet. It was starting to become a routine. As the closet doorknob from my closet began to turn, my light went out. Darkness. I should have expected this, but it was something I had hoped would be forgotten by whatever ghost or ghoul was in that closet. The stench filled the air and my room became cold. I watched as the closet door began slowly opening. I listened as the floor creaked under the weight of this being. The Beastie Boys stopped mid-song. The stereo switched off. The footsteps drew closer. This time, I could hear breath. I had not noticed this the other times. Slow, deep breathing. A new breath with each new footstep. my blankets pulled just under my eyes. I peered out, trying to catch at least a glimpse of whatever this was. The smell was horrific. The cold was almost unbearable. Closer and closer, the heavy footsteps slowly shuffled their way to my side of the room, as if its feet were slightly dragging across the floor, until it was over top of me. I was frozen with fear. I had to remember to breathe, but each breath was labored, as if something was trying to push on my chest to keep any air from entering my body. I wanted to cry, but that too was being suppressed. This thing was standing over me, breathing. I couldn't see it, but I could hear it. Then, within an instant, it grabbed my leg. Somehow it avoided my blankets and my pajama pants and touched directly on my skin with a firm, icy grip. The smell of death and decay. I managed to roll off the bed and thudded hard on the floor, hurting my shoulder. Pain shot through my arm, but the icy grip on my leg was broken. I sprung to my feet and took 3 quick steps to my sister's door while grabbing whatever bedding would fit in one hand. I didn't knock. I threw open the door, flung myself into her room, and slammed the door behind me as I leaned against the door crying, pillow and blanket in hand. I heard my sister stir.
"What are you doing in my room? Get out!"
She must have realized just then that I was crying. My emotions had returned, or at least the ability to display them. There was no effort made by the entity to enter this room. Why? I didn't know, and I didn't care. I removed my body from the door and threw my pillow and blanket on the floor. "I'm sleeping here tonight," I said. She must have been too tired to argue. I didn't hear another word from her. From under the door, I saw it was still dark in my room, but I could once again hear the sounds of the Beastie Boys at a low hum emanating from my room. There was something about her room. It felt safe. I had not spent much time in here before this, but I felt instantly at ease, like something was watching over us, protecting us. My heartbeat instantly slowed to a normal pace, and my breathing was like nothing ever happened. It was strange. This routine went on for another year. Sometimes my sister would reluctantly let me sleep in her room, but other times I was on my own. Sometimes I would charge out of my room and run down the hall to the bathroom until I could hear music playing again from my room. That was my indicator that it was safe to return. In that year, I lost friendships, relationships with females, dropped out of sports, and began hanging with the wrong crowd. I started drinking at a young age. My parents had split up, and eventually we moved from that house. I hate that damn house. That house holds its secrets to this day. I've made it a point to drive in its vicinity every 10 years or so. It still scares me, and I don't get too close to it. I can feel the dread emanating from it. At one point, it had become condemned, but I guess someone saw something good in it and remodeled it, breathing new life into it. Life or unliving. I often wondered if I should knock on the door and ask the current owners of their experiences. Maybe if something was happening to them, they would feel less alone. Maybe. But whatever is in there needs to remain in that damn house and not see the likes of me again. But whatever it is, I hope one day someone's able to send it to hell.